Hi guys, my name is Michelle and welcome to The Weight of Things. In this video, what we are going to be talking about is a few tips that I have to help you to deal with anxiety, pressure, and anything that comes along with it. Before we go on with the rest of the video, if you haven't already, please make sure that you subscribe and click the bell below so that you can be notified of every time that I create a new video. As I have mentioned before, I am not a psychologist, a psychiatrist, a counselor by any means. I am just somebody who has been through a few things in life and wanted to share some tips that has helped me and some things that I have learned along the way. My first tip that I would have for you is to find out what your triggers are. Find out what triggers you. Anytime that you start to feel anxious or you start to feel an anxiety attack or a panic attack or you start to feel really pressured, find out what it is that is causing that. Could it be that you have too much on your plate? Could it be a certain person? Could it be a certain circumstance? Find out what the trigger of these attacks are. This not only helps with things like anxiety and panic attacks and pressure, but it can also help with anything in life. If you happen to suffer like I do with being a people pleaser, sometimes you need to find out what triggers you, what makes you go into that people pleasing mode. So in every situation, it's good to find out what triggers you, what makes you feel vulnerable, what is it that gets to you to make you react or feel a certain way. It's always good to find out what those triggers are because that's what will help us to lessen the occurrence from happening. Once we do figure out what our trigger is, then it's probably best for us to try to figure out what has caused that to be a trigger in the first place. Sometimes the trigger could be because of something that happened in our childhood, something that happened in a previous relationship, or something that's just happening in our life right now. But once we find out what the source of the trigger is, then we can receive healing in that area or deal with that current situation in whatever manner that it can lessen the amount of anxiety and panic attacks or pressure that we are experiencing. Sometimes it's good for us to go back into our past, to our childhood, or whenever the occurrence may have been, so that we can truly heal by forgiving, letting go, understanding, and trying to accept what may have happened to us. It's only when we truly heal from a situation does it not continue to have a hold on us and continue to be a trigger. Oftentimes, triggers can be something that resembles something that has been painful or hurtful that has happened to us before in the past. That's why it's important to first identify what the trigger is and then identify what may have caused that to become a trigger to begin with. The second tip that I would recommend, and I recommend this on every level, whether you are somebody that suffers with anxiety, depression, I implement this in my life, and when I don't, I find life to be more stressful. So it's something that I would definitely recommend for everybody across the board, and that is practicing the pause. Practicing the pause is so key in every situation. I don't know, you've probably experienced it before where you are about to just really go off on somebody. They said something to you, they did something to you, and you're stewing in your mind. You can't wait to let them have an earful or to rip their heads off. And you just want to just react right at that moment. But practicing the pause is the best thing that you can do. You've probably heard it said before that if you really want to write a message to somebody or you really want to write an email to somebody, that you should probably write it and save it and walk away. Wait for a couple of hours till the situation has died down, you've cooled down, you've had a time to really take in everything that happened and really make a conscious decision, and then go back and read that message or that email and see if it's something that you still want to send. A lot of times something that happens with us as society is we feel like everything is an emergency. Everything needs to be addressed right at that very moment. If we receive an email or we receive a phone call, we have to give that person a response right away. And when that happens, we can feel anxious. We can start to feel anxiety. We can start to feel pressure. And when that happens, whether you're feeling anxiety or pressure or just in general, you're just feeling upset, you will react out of that emotion instead of out of reason and logic. This is why it is so important to practice the pause. This also works when it comes on with children. Sometimes with children, something happens and somebody gets hurt and we will just go off right away because in our minds, it's like our child is crying, there's an emergency, I need to deal with it right now. But a lot of times the things that we consider emergencies are not emergencies. They are not things that need to be dealt with right at that moment. And we need to learn to practice the pause so that we can mentally get ourselves in a place to be able to properly deal with the situation in a reasonable and logical fashion. Even if you're face to face with the person or you're on a telephone call, sometimes when we are in a direct contact with somebody, we think that we have no escape to be able to write the email and then come back to it later. However, you don't have to give the person a response to what they're saying right away. You can easily say something like, I'll get back to you on that, or you know what, I have to go right now, but I will talk to you later. There is ways for you to remove yourself from the situation so that you can practice the pause and be able to really think the situation through so that you can have a well thought out response for that person. A lot of times people talk about experiencing social anxiety. It is a real thing. They feel very anxious and stuff when they are in social settings. That if social anxiety is a thing that we have, we need to understand that is a trigger for us. Is dealing with people on that level may be a trigger for us. We can try to definitely find out what is the source of that, why we may feel anxiety in social settings. But also we need to realize that this is something that we are dealing with, and while we are dealing with it and healing with it, we need to give ourselves space to learn and grow and be able to adapt, and not think that we need to thrust ourselves into a situation that's just gonna bring on more anxiety for us and make the situation worse. There are times where you may need to put yourself out there. If you're somebody that deals with social anxiety and every single time you get an invitation, your answer is always no, then that might be something that you definitely would want to kind of try to push the limits and try to put yourself out there. But in all circumstances, in all decision makings, I believe that practicing the pause is a very important step to allow ourselves that moment to really realize, is this actually an emergency? Is this actually a situation I need to put myself into? Is this actually the response that I should be giving right now? When we react right away, that is what will bring on pressure and anxiety and panic attacks, when we feel like we need to act right in that moment because our mind tells us that everything is an emergency, when really, unless it's a life and death situation, it is not an emergency. It can wait until you're able to get yourself in a stable place to be able to answer and deal with that situation the way that it needs to be addressed. Now, this is not exhaustive, and this is obviously not a generalized statement across the board, but I do hope that these tips will be able to help some of you who may struggle with feeling pressure, feeling like you need to address everything right at the moment, learning how to be able to practice that pause, to give yourself the time to be able to properly process the situation and be able to proceed based on being in a level mind at that moment and realizing that everything is not an emergency. Everything does need to be dealt with at that moment, that it is perfectly okay to walk away from a situation, get yourself together, get your thoughts together, and then come back to that situation later. These are things that can help us if we do tend to deal with anxiety, if we do tend to feel pressured a lot, but it can also help all of us in general as well. I hope that these tips have helped you. If you have any questions or any other tips that you think might help somebody that may deal with some of these things, then please feel free to leave it in the comment section below. And again, if you're new to this channel, please make sure that you subscribe and click the bell below so you can get notified of every time that I create a new video. And if you are already my subscriber, then welcome back. Thanks for watching.